Welcome to real history, where the truth is bloodier than fiction. The room smells of velvet rot, and something you can't name, the scent of death that's soaked into every curtain, every stone. You don't know what time it is anymore. They took your jewelry, your maid, your title, your name. What's left is a girl in a borrowed gown, pacing across a room meant for corpses. Before we peel back the skin of history, like and subscribe, but only if you dare. And while you're here, tell us, what's your city?
History
what's your time?
doesn't forgive
Because
the
time, as you'll see,
forgetful.
runs out fast. Now take a breath, dim the lights, and let's descend into tonight's true story. You're 17, you're shaking, and they've promised not to make you wait long. You're in the Queen's lodgings of the Tower of London. Ironic, since you're no longer queen. The walls are lined with tapestries you used to admire, back when your biggest worry was if the king would touch you that night. Now the fabric just blocks out the screaming from outside. You're not allowed mirrors anymore. You begged for one so you could see yourself before the axe did. They refused. So you study your reflection in a bowl of water, watching ripples fracture your face. They say you were hysterical, that you wept like a child, that you collapsed. But what would they expect from a girl pulled out of her wedding bed, accused of treason, and marched across England like a prize pig on its final walk? Outside the thick walls, ravens circle the tower green. You hear boots, the scrape of steel. You kneel, practice again. You've done it 50 times by now, rehearsed how to lay your neck just right, so the blade catches clean. But your hair's too thick. You worry the axe will catch. You begged for a sword like Anne Boleyn's. Denied. The guards come tomorrow. You'll be led to the block in the same path they dragged her. The same stones, the same whispers, the same lies. And no one will ask if you were really guilty. They never do. The doors creak open. You flinch like a hunted animal, but it's only the priest again. He's kind, or maybe just good at pretending. He offers you a chance at confession, and you nod, though your sins are someone else's design. You kneel, hands folded, but you're not praying. You're buying time, because the past has a sound. It floods in when everything else falls silent. You hear voices now. Not the priest's, he's mumbling something about mercy and the afterlife. No, these voices come from further back. A giggle behind a curtain, a gasp in the garden. The whispers of maids who once brushed your hair and now pretend they never knew you. Remember the ring you dropped in the fountain that day at Lambeth? You were 15. Francis Derham fished it out, called you his wife. You laughed the kind of laugh you'll never make again, one that didn't know how dangerous love could be. They say ghosts roam the tower, but you know better. It's not the dead who haunt these halls. It's the living, the ones who remember the ones who lie, and the ones who will walk away from your execution pretending it was justified. You hear your name again, but it's not yours anymore. The priest calls you Catherine, Queen of England. The guards call you the girl. The records will call you a traitor. And history for the next 500 years will call you a whore. They'll say you danced too freely, smiled too often, that you flirted like a serpent and deceived a king. But here's what they won't say. You were a child, married to a monster. They said you were a rose without a thorn. But no rose survives long in a garden full of knives. You ask the priest to leave. You want to be alone, because before the blade comes, you must walk back through every mistake, every kiss, every breath, every secret, and carry it with you like a shroud. Your hour has begun. You weren't born to be remembered, not like this. The world first met you as a whisper, Catherine Howard, niece to the Duke of Norfolk, barely literate, barely noble, barely even noticed. One of 10 children forgotten by your own mother's grave and scattered into the chaos of a divided England. They sent you to live with your step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, not because she loved you, but because noble girls had to be stored somewhere. Her household was a chaotic menagerie of orphaned girls and predatory men, where privacy was a myth and supervision a joke. You slept in a dormitory, drapes hung between beds to fake decency. You learned fast that secrets only lasted until someone with a mouth decided to trade them for favor. What they'll never say plainly is this: you were groomed. The first man who taught you love was your music teacher, Henry Mannix. He touched your fingers wrong on the virginal keys. He taught you to blush on cue. You didn't know then that you were being rehearsed, not for music, but for exploitation. Even your handwriting betrayed you. Crude, clumsy, uncertain, letters with hearts and little flourishes, not the script of a queen, but of a child desperate to be seen. Still you were beautiful, and that was your real education. By 15, you had already learned how to laugh without meaning it, how to hold your posture while being undressed, how to survive in rooms where the doors always locked from the outside. Then your family noticed, not your bruises, not your tears. No, they noticed that King Henry was looking for a new queen, and you still had all your teeth. So they dressed you in silks, painted your lips, and sent you to court like a sacrificial lamb wrapped in lace. No one warned you what marrying a king really meant. You weren't chosen because you were clever. You were chosen because you were easy to ruin. You thought you were marrying into safety, but the House of Howard doesn't deal in safety. It deals in survival, and survival means blood. Yours, if necessary. Your uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, is the kind of man who could smile while watching someone hang. He'd already placed one niece, Anne Boleyn, into the king's bed. She lost her head for it. Now he sets his sights on you. They dressed you like a queen, long before the crown touched your head. Paraded you through court with honey in your hair and rubies on your chest. It was a performance, and you played your part perfectly. Not because you wanted to, but because saying no was never an option. In Tudor England, a noble girl was a chess piece, and your family moved you like a pawn, hoping to win back power after Anne's downfall. They thought you'd be smarter, quieter, softer. But history has a taste for irony. When the king saw you, he lit up like a dying fire catching wind. You were everything his last wife wasn't: young, pliable, beautiful. You made him feel alive, so he declared you his rose without a thorn. You smiled, you curtsied, you danced, and in that moment, your family sealed your fate. The Howards were masters of courtly manipulation. They had survived decades of purges, betrayals, executions. Even the Boleyn bloodline hadn't been enough to bring them down. But they always needed fresh currency, And Catherine, you were that currency. What they didn't calculate was the rot already growing under the throne. Henry was no longer the golden god of England. He was swollen, festering, dragging one leg paranoid of shadows. His court reeked of betrayal and sweat. And you, the teenage bride, were expected to save him. But queens don't save kings. They get blamed when kings fall. And the House of Howard, it always knew how this would end. He wasn't a king. He wasn't even noble. But he was the first man who put his hands on your skin and made you believe it was love. Henry Mannix, a music teacher with a grin that bent at the edges. He taught you the virginals how to play delicate keys with fingers still growing. But those same fingers were pulled aside in the dark behind curtains under candlelight. He called it affection. He called it attention. You called it nothing. You didn't yet have the words for what it really was. You were 13, maybe younger. He was older, not ancient, just enough to know better. And in the Dowager Duchess's household, no one watched. Or worse, they did, and said nothing. You thought it was normal, that this was what becoming a woman looked like, that a man choosing you was a kind of power, that love was meant to feel like waiting for footsteps in the hallway, like holding your breath in case someone saw. The Duchess didn't stop it. The other girls only whispered. And when Mannix was caught, hand too low, eyes too bold, he laughed, claimed you were still intact, that nothing real had happened. But it had. Something broke, something invisible but permanent. And then came Francis Derham, louder, bolder, less a teacher, more a storm. He brought you gifts, letters, promises. He made you think you had a future, that the past could be rewritten in candlelit kisses and the soft rustle of sheets. Some say you were married by pre-contract. Others say it was childish fantasy. But it doesn't matter. In Henry's England, a queen who had loved before had already committed her final sin. They call it scandal. But the scandal wasn't your desire. It was that you survived the first man and dared to keep living. Francis would return. Henry Mannix would testify. The secrets you carried in silence would be torn out, repackaged as evidence. Because a girl's body in Tudor England is never really hers. The court smelled of sweat and roses, a sickly perfume that clung to the silk walls of Whitehall. You walked through it like a dream, hips swaying beneath gold-threaded skirts. And somewhere across the room the king watched you. He was no prince from the fairy tales. Henry VIII was swollen, ulcered, and half-rotten, his leg wrapped in linen soaked with pus, his face a pale monument to time and tyranny. But he still believed in beauty. And you were a masterpiece. To him you weren't a person. You were a mirror, polished and young, reflecting back the glory he'd lost. You laughed when he needed it, danced when he gestured. You became his medicine, and for a while, it worked. The old men at court whispered that the king had been reborn. He wore bright colors again, gave gifts, smiled. They called you his little angel, his pearl, his jewel. But not his equal. Never that. He paraded you around like a prize falcon. Too delicate to fly, too valuable to release. You kissed his hand in public, called him my sovereign lord, learned to nod at his rambling stories, and you never ever mentioned the stench that followed him into every room. When he gave you the crown, it was a wedding and a funeral all at once. Your family rejoiced. The Howards returned to favor. The court bowed. The crowds cheered. But you smiled like a woman walking into her own grave, because you already knew something was wrong. On your wedding night, you saw the truth up close. The king was a monster, not because he beat you or screamed at you, but because he believed he owned you. Body, heart, history. He called you a rose without a thorn, but roses die in cages, and the thorns, they were yours. He wanted youth, but he forgot youth doesn't stay silent forever. You had rehearsed it all, the modest gasp, the trembling hands, the grateful gaze. They told you what was expected: yield, flatter, perform. No one cared if you bled, just that you didn't scream. The chamber was stifling. Thick tapestries, heavy bedclothes, candles flickering like dying eyes. He came to you groaning under his own weight, his body half dead, already dragging its disease toward your youth, like a curse, on two legs. You smiled, because what else was there to do? He tried. That much can be said. Clumsy hands, breath that reeked of wine and decay, a kiss that felt like a burial. He called you angel, dove, sweet girl, over and over as if the repetition might mask what wasn't happening. Historians still debate whether the marriage was ever consummated. Some say yes, that he took you in the night, and you endured it silently. Others claim he couldn't, that the wound in his leg had spread too far, and that nothing worked anymore, not even desire. But it doesn't matter. Whether he touched you or not, the shame still bled into your sheets, because afterward he told the court he had known you, and you had to nod, had to pretend the lie was sacred. You laughed at breakfast. You danced in the gardens. You played the good little queen because everyone was watching, and a queen who failed in bed could lose her head. You tried to imagine it was love, that the crown made the weight on your chest worth it, that you were special, that you'd last longer than Anne Jane or Anne again. But in the dark, when the servants left and the candles burned out, you knew the truth. You were the king's fifth wife, not the first, not the last, just next. And when his eyes grew cold, when the novelty wore off, you knew he'd find another girl with bright eyes and soft lies. You just hoped you'd still be alive when he did. You thought you could keep the past buried beneath lace and titles. But secrets don't sleep, Catherine. They rot quietly at first, then all at once. Francis Derham came back like a ghost with a voice. After your marriage, he found a place in your household. You gave him a position, thinking loyalty could be repaid with silence. You called it mercy. The court called it madness. They whispered that he had too much access, too many memories, that he knew the way to your chambers too well. Maybe they were right. Maybe he bragged. Maybe he just looked at you the wrong way too often in front of the wrong eyes. And there were the letters. You never should have written to Thomas Culpepper, the king's groom, handsome and charming, with eyes that promised escape. Some historians still argue whether you truly loved him or if it was just fantasy. But fantasy is deadly when you wear a crown. You sent him notes folded with trembling fingers. They were delivered by your lady-in-waiting, Jane Rochford, Anne Boleyn's sister-in-law, and a woman who should have known better. Some say she wanted to protect you. Others say she wanted revenge on the king. But the result was the same. The letters spoke of longing, of stolen glances, of midnight wishes. Maybe nothing more. But in Tudor court, wishing was treason enough. Then came the chest, a wooden box hidden in your chambers containing evidence no queen should ever keep old love letters. Keepsakes, tokens from before the crown, before the cage. You thought they were harmless, sentimental scraps from a life that no longer existed. But in the hands of your enemies, they became a noose. Once opened, the chest didn't just expose your secrets, it made you a threat. Not to the king's body, but to his pride. Henry could forgive treason in a man, but humiliation from a woman never. And just like that, the roses began to wither. Your bed became a prison, your silence an admission. Because in this court, innocence isn't proof, it's bait. They used to call you radiant. Now they call you dirty. Whispers began in the corridors, cautious at first, then gleeful. You felt it in the way ladies curtsied slower, how servants averted their eyes, how your name left their lips like a stain. You were still queen, but your gowns no longer fit like armor. They hung on you like shrouds. The court is a beast that eats its own. And you, Catherine, had become its most appetizing rumor. They said your laughter was too loud, that your walks with Culpeper were too long, that your petticoats showed mud as if proof of guilt could cling to fabric. One courtier claimed to see you emerge from a room with flushed cheeks. Another said you smiled too easily when Thomas bowed. They all wanted to believe it, because nothing excites a dying court like the downfall of a girl too beautiful for her own good. Even Archbishop Cranmer, that bloodless weasel wrapped in scripture, found his courage. He slipped a folded note into the king's hand during Mass. Just a whisper on parchment. That's all it took. Henry turned pale, then purple, then still. The next day the locks on your doors changed. You were confined to your rooms. The laughter stopped. The music vanished. And in its place, silence. Endless echoing silence. They searched your belongings, questioned your ladies, questioned you. The interrogations began softly veiled in concern, but the questions sharpened. Who touched you when where were you a virgin on your wedding night? Your answers didn't matter, because by then the verdict had already been whispered behind every curtain in Whitehall. Historians still argue if Culpeper and you truly slept together. The truth, it doesn't matter, because in Tudor England perception is evidence and dignity is a luxury. Queens don't keep long. Your innocence, if it ever existed, was filthier than guilt. The rose was rotting, and every petal was now a page in your indictment. They didn't need whips or racks to break you, just rooms too quiet and questions too slow. You were still dressed like a queen. Velvet sleeves, pearled bodice, hair combed into perfection, but everything beneath trembled. Your heartbeat lived in your throat, and your fingers wouldn't stop twitching. The interrogators came in pairs, all cloaked in civility. Bishops, courtiers, scribes. They bowed before sitting, called you your grace, even as they peeled your life apart like rotted fruit. They asked about Manox. You winced. Derham, you hesitated. Culpeper, you lied. It didn't matter. The ink had already dried before your mouth opened. The worst part, Jane Rochford was speaking too. Your own lady-in-waiting, the woman who once swore loyalty cracked like glass. She told them everything. The secret letters, the midnight meetings. That one night, Culpeper stayed too long. Maybe nothing happened. Maybe it did. But Jane said enough to sew your shroud. And the king, he didn't rage. He didn't storm down the corridor with thunder in his breath. He wept. They say Henry locked himself in his chambers for hours, howling, that he didn't eat, that he lashed out at the tapestries, that he screamed your name like it betrayed him personally. Not because you were guilty, but because you reminded him he was old. He had married youth and still couldn't escape decay. You were moved to Sion Abbey, under heavy guard. A former queen, now a prisoner. The air smelled of stone and cold prayers. You prayed too, but not for forgiveness, for mercy, for a second chance, for someone, anyone to believe. You hadn't meant for this to happen, but every word you spoke sounded like guilt, every tear like performance. Historians still argue if your confessions were coerced. But what's the difference? When the axe is already sharpening, even the truth learns to bleed. You weren't just losing your crown. You were losing your name, your history, yourself. And outside in the dark, London was already building a scaffold just your size. The ink was cold. The parchment thicker than you expected, like skin. You stared at the confession they asked you to sign, not words you wrote, not truths you chose, but names, dates, details dragged from your mouth like splinters. You didn't write it, but it would carry your name into history. They called it treason, consorting with men before and after your marriage, lying to the king, endangering the line of succession. You weren't just unfaithful, Catherine. They said you were a national threat. But treason in Tudor England is elastic. It wraps itself around whatever the king needs it to be. And this time, he needed it to be you. Francis Derham was arrested first. They tortured him, stripped him, demolished him. He confessed not out of guilt, but because every answer bought him a moment of breath. Culpeper came next. He swore there was affection, desire, but no consummation. It didn't matter. The king wanted blood, not nuance. They were both condemned, and so were you. What they don't teach in school is how the documents feel in your hand, how heavy a signature becomes when it promises your death. You paused, the quill trembled, then you signed, and somewhere behind that ink the girl you once were disappeared. News spread fast. The court feigned shock. The people were told you had led an abominable life before and after marriage. They nodded, believed. Forgotten was your age, your grooming, your fear. All that mattered was the stain you left on Henry's pride. The king annulled the marriage, called you corrupt, compared you to Eve, the woman who ruined paradise. But he never blamed himself. He never asked what it meant to marry a child who still practiced curtsies when no one watched. You were no longer Queen Catherine, just a traitor, a liar, a girl with too many lovers and not enough silence. And now the axe was coming for all of them. Culpeper, Derham, and you. The summons came at dawn. No warning, no ceremony. Just boots on polished floors and hands that didn't care how gently you used to be touched. You were dragged from Hampton Court that they're half-dressed, screaming. They say your cries echoed down the marble halls, that you shouted for Henry, by name pleaded for an audience, begged to explain. But the king didn't come. He never would again. Servants froze as you passed. Some bowed, some turned away, a few wept. But no one stopped it, because in England when a queen falls, she falls alone. Your carriage was sealed like a coffin. You were transported not as royalty, but as a prisoner. Your ladies were dismissed, your letters confiscated, and the man who once called you his precious jewel now called you nothing at all. Sion Abbey awaited cold stone, no tapestries, no warmth. They kept you under guard, fed you just enough, let you pray, let you rot. But it wasn't the waiting that broke you. It was the silence. Every hour passed like a blade grazing the neck. You asked for updates. None came. You begged for mercy. The guards didn't answer. So you started talking to yourself, to God, to the wind, to the ghosts of queens who had walked this path before you. Anne Boleyn's name pressed against your thoughts like frostbite. She had danced, too, laughed too loudly, touched the wrong man. She had died, not 20 steps from where you'd be led. And then came the death warrants. Derham hanged, drawn, and quartered. Culpeper beheaded. Quiet, efficient, their bodies were put on display. You weren't allowed to see, but you imagined it anyway. You had to. It was the only way to prepare. You kept practicing laying your neck down on a cushion at night, whispering like this, like this, like this, trying to get it right, trying to make it painless. But the truth, there is no right way to die at 17, especially not in a world that never wanted you to live for anything more than your body. The tower looms, black against a bruised sky. You arrive not as a queen, but as cargo a traitor, in a borrowed cloak too small to hide your fear. They put you in the same room Anne Boleyn once prayed in. The irony is cruel, deliberate. You can still smell her, not her perfume, but her legacy. A warning soaked into every stone. You don't sleep. You can't. Instead, you kneel on the floor, a cushion beneath your knees, and practice. Again, again, again. Lay your neck. Fold your hands. Still your breath. You whisper to yourself like a lullaby, it won't hurt. If I'm still, it won't hurt. You believe it, or try to. The priest visits. He speaks of forgiveness, of redemption. He tells you that heaven awaits. But you've stopped caring about heaven. You just want it to be quick. They bring you the block. Yes, the actual block. You begged for it, pleaded to be allowed one final mercy, the chance to rehearse, and they allowed it, because even your execution needed to be performed properly. So you lower yourself, feel the cold wood against your skin, let your hair fall forward, count the seconds, try to guess the moment when the blade would strike. No blindfold. You refused it. You said you wanted to see. But the truth is simpler. You're tired of pretending. You wore veils long enough in life. You won't die with one. You ask for a final message, something to leave behind. I die a queen, but I would rather die the wife of Culpeper. That's the line history remembers. No one knows if you said it, but they remember it because it cuts deeper than steel, because it's not just death you're facing, it's judgment. Not from God, from men who've already buried you with their words. And still, You kneel, because you think somehow that obedience will spare you pain. It won't. The cold hits your lungs first, sharp, immediate, the kind of air that feels like punishment. The Tower Green isn't a stage. It's a pit bordered by stone and memory. And it remembers you, Catherine. The cobblestones remember your bare feet. The sky remembers Anne. The axe remembers everyone. You walk forward head high, gown dragging in mud. They didn't let you wear white. Too innocent. So you wear black velvet, stitched at the collar, simple, grim. The color of grief. The color of erasure. The crowd is silent. Unnaturally so. They've come to see the fall of a queen, but what stands before them is a girl. Thin, shaking lips moving in prayer, or maybe apology. It's hard to tell. A scaffold built for one moment. You mount the steps slowly, as if they might vanish beneath your feet. The executioner waits, hooded still. He has a French blade, the wide, clean kind, not the heavy axe used for commoners. A final mercy, they say, though mercy is always conditional. You kneel, you know how, you've practiced. You adjust your hair so it won't get caught. You smooth your skirt, why, who knows? Reflex, habit. A queen must die gracefully. Then you speak, voice thin but steady. I die a queen, but I would rather die the wife of Thomas Culpeper. Gasps. The priest winces. But you don't care. It's the last truth you'll get to tell. The wind stills. The crowd leans forward, and the axe comes down. Clean, fast, almost tender, they'll say. The head rolls, the body slumps. And in that moment, Catherine Howard is gone. 17 years old, erased by ink rumor, and a man who loved power more than people. They carry your body away. No royal tomb, no great epitaph. Just a place beside Anne, 2 wives, reduced to names carved into silence. And the king, he never visits your grave. Your story didn't end at the scaffold. It was rewritten by men who needed you to be guilty. The scribes called you unchaste. The bishops called you impure. The historians for centuries called you foolish, a flirt, a child too stupid to know better, a body too eager to keep closed. But none of them asked what chance does a girl have when even silence is treated as seduction. They forgot you were groomed, that your first lessons in love were forced into you behind locked doors, that you didn't have tutors, you had handlers, that by the time Henry looked at you, you didn't know where performance ended and obedience began. They ignored your age. 17 when you died. 15 when the king found you. 12 when the touching started. They say you should have known better, but no one ever taught you better, only how to survive. Your family used you. Your court betrayed you. Your king discarded you. And history, the great judge of the dead, called you dangerous because you dared to be young and human at the wrong time. Even now, scholars argue. Was she guilty? Was she naive? Was she in love? But those aren't the questions that matter. The real question is, why was it so easy to kill you? Anne Boleyn was framed with poetry and a smile. Jane Seymour died birthing a boy. Anne of Cleves escaped by playing the fool. Catherine Parr outlived him. You were the one who learned all their lessons and still died screaming. Because the truth is this, you didn't die because you were wicked. You died because you were inconvenient, a living reminder that kings rot and girls can't stay quiet forever. You were never a whore. You were a mirror, and no man in power likes what he sees reflected back when it's still bleeding.